If you know someone who is autistic, avoid these terms for describing them. I'm Wolf, I'm autistic, I've been autistic my entire life, but I was diagnosed in my early 20s, so I've lived most of my life trying to live as a non-autistic person, or allistic person. Now that I'm recognizing why my life has always been a bit weird, or that I've always felt like I stick out, I'm learning all kinds of things about autism. And I also should mention that some of the items on this list are still okay for some autistic people, but at the end of the day, if you don't know, just ask what they would rather you use. I'm going to start with the ones I find the least offensive or ableist to the most, so I suppose there is some subjectivity to it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a completely objective person. No one is. I am one autistic person, and while I don't represent the whole community, I tried to include terms that autistic people generally dislike. So this one's actually still used fairly often, although autistic adults are trying to push back against this, because what the f*** does high and low functioning even mean? Yep, we're talking about high and low functioning. So this idea of high functioning and low functioning turns autism into a binary, which, despite how a lot of us think in black and white, autism is not a binary, it's a spectrum, although it's less a spectrum like this and more spectrum like that. If that even makes sense, it's an endless circle. I'll put a graphic up in editing or something. For someone that does use these terms, however, they might consider someone like me to be high-functioning since I can speak clearly, hold down a job, and take care of 2 cats, but I'm a bit nerdy and quirky, so I'm just a little different, that's all it is. Someone they might consider low-functioning would be someone who might have trouble forming sentences, can't dress themselves, or they might have to live in a group home or with their families well into their adult life. Now, here's why you should not be using these terms. So first reason, they're a bit confusing, and people who are unfamiliar with autism often mix the two up. Like, they might call me low functioning because they think less autism versus high functioning means they're highly autistic. People confuse those terms a lot, believe me. The second reason is that to many of us autistic people, it seems like a convenient way to say that this autistic person is less of a burden on their caretakers and society overall, while this one is a larger burden. It's putting autistics into a box based on terms that aren't scientifically based. And my third reason is, what does it really mean to be high or low functioning? Like, people who are outwardly high functioning might be struggling with remembering to pay their bills. That's definitely my scenario. Or keeping the house clean, and they might stim discreetly until they get home, and then they're just flapping their arms all over. I'm not making fun of people who do that at all. Literally earlier today, I saw the announcement for the new Tomodachi Life, and I was doing this at the end of the trailer because I was just that excited. I know that's not a genuine display of stimming because I had to perform that, but that's almost what I did whenever I saw that trailer. It was so good. I was bouncing up in my seat too. I was so glad to see that they're making a new Tomodachi Life. But that's another tangent, so I need to get back on topic. Meanwhile, there are autistics who would traditionally be called low functioning, but if you give them an iPad to type with, they can easily communicate with others. They could be absolute STEM geniuses, or they could have a really great memory and know the routine for everyone in their household. I mean, I've committed my own routine to memory and I still forget it. So some autistics function better in some areas than others, while another autistic person might function in the opposite way. Does that even make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense. As many of us say, if you've met one autistic person, you've just met one autistic person. So I think it's a bit odd to lump such a diverse community into these two high and low functioning camps. And like I said, what does low and high functioning even mean? Like, autistic people, they have very spiky profiles, so they're really good at some things and can't do other things. That's just how it is. That's how it's always been for autism. We've always been very spiky, not just high or just low functioning. Let's just move on. Acoustic. So I wasn't diagnosed with autism when using acoustic as a replacement for autistic was at its peak, but even back then I thought it was a bit weird and it felt like it almost made being autistic a joke. Even now I think it is a bit stupid and turns autism into a punchline, but it's also one of those internet fads that didn't end up sticking, so I don't want to dwell too much on it. This is acoustic, this is not. Person with autism. So this is one that's a little bit more personal than the last two. So I dislike person first language in general and much prefer identity first, especially for myself being an autistic person. I've heard this many times and I have to agree. Person first language tries to separate autism from the person when the person wouldn't be who they are without the autism. However, some autistics do prefer to be called a person with autism, and that's fine for them. If someone tells you to use that instead, use it. But in general, and for myself, Use identity first. I'm an autistic person, not a person with autism. But again, if you're not sure, just ask the person directly. I need a drink of water, dudes. Severe and mild autism. This one is pretty similar to the high and low functioning, so I won't dig into it too much. Basically, just say severe autism is low functioning and mild autism is high functioning. Again, it implies that there are two types of autism and that every autistic is one or the other, but that's just not correct. No. It also implies something else too, that someone is more autistic than another person, and that's not correct either. You either are autistic, meaning you meet the criteria for autism in the DSM-5, unless there's a new diagnostic manual by the time you're watching this, or you are not autistic. It is you are or you aren't. You can have autistic traits if you're not autistic, but that doesn't inherently mean you are. No, not everyone is just a little bit autistic. That's stupid. Now, many autistics do share similar experiences, but they're not all the same experiences. But they are all autistic experiences. No severe or mild about it. Special. Just avoid this for disabled people in general, please. This is the word that I'm sure every autistic person hates being called, because it's the word people use when they are uncomfortable with saying disabled, because as many of us know, disability is stigmatized in many areas today. We're working on it, but it's still stigmatized. This one is my number 3 least liked term because it's a term that enables fake people. Like, just don't say this. Everyone knows what you're getting at. Get over yourself soon. Asperger's, or Asperger's, however you pronounce it. I want to make a video about the history of autism and maybe a separate one about Asperger's specifically because there's a lot there too, but I'll keep it basic just for the sake of this video. Hans Asperger was the man the Nazis put in charge of deciding which disabled children were worth keeping alive and sending the ones he deemed too burdensome for society to their death. Now, he did decide many autistic kids would live, but he sent many more to their deaths who would be considered low-functioning or severely autistic. And for some reason, they named a former autism subtype after the guy. Back when autism was split into smaller disabilities, Asperger's was one of those subtypes. It used to be considered an autistic disorder, not the autistic disorder or a separate disorder from autism. So it was still part of autism, just as it's the high-functioning ones, basically. I hate using that term. But now it's all considered autism spectrum disorder because there is no scientific basis for autism subtypes. This term is so high up on my list because I've never been diagnosed with Asperger's. I was diagnosed after that term was outdated. It's not a term I relate to, partially because it was never a label that was given to me. It's never one that I felt like I belonged to. And it also has very deep ties to fascism and ableism. Now, some people are trying to reclaim the word Asperger's from this fascist and ableist history and call themselves that. There are few autistics who still call themselves a person with Asperger's, and that's okay for them. I don't want to take away their autism card for saying they'd rather call their diagnosis Asperger's instead, though. Like, that's all. I don't want to take away anyone's autism card away. But I do not have Asperger's. Technically, no one does, but people still use it, I guess. Just don't use it for me. Don't use it in general. Only use Asperger's with the people that have specifically said this is what I have, or that identify with that label. Now let's get to the last word that is not necessarily autism specific, but it has been used on autistic people and is usually thought of with autism, at least from my understanding of the world. And I'm not sure I can say it on YouTube without some kind of strike, so here it is. The R slur. I'm sure some of you knew this was coming, and I hate that I still have to say this, but don't use it. It's similar to being called special, except venomous. Nothing is endearing about this word. It is insulting, it is disrespectful, and dismissive of the person you're targeting, whether they are autistic or they have another disability. Even if someone has an intellectual disability and would fall under the term mental retardation if it was still being used, don't use it because it's not in use anymore. Language changes over time, definitions change, and now it's really only used to hurt people. Like, I don't even say the R slur out loud because it feels icky to say, but also just to hear in any context. Like, only reason I said retardation is because I was quoting a medical term that is outdated now. It's why some comedy shows from the early 2000s are hard for me to go back and watch. The episode Petarded from Family Guy, and the episode D, Dates a Man from It's Always Sunny, are two that come to mind specifically. So these are the terms that I could think of and find that are generally disliked by the autistic community. Personally, I dislike all of these, but clearly there are some that I dislike much more than others. And I'm sure that you feel the same, although not identically my opinions. Hopefully not, that'd be creepy. But did I miss any, and are there terms that you were surprised to find on this list? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be back again when I get another one of these done, I suppose.